We know what we should do. We just don't actually want to do it. So, we're going to talk about Dr. Kyra's book, Unstoppable Brain, that debunks today's overdependence on performance driven tools such as calorie counting and smart goals and likes and followers that attempt to motivate us into behavioral change. Dr. Kyra Bobinet, welcome to the Lindsey Show.
Great to be here.
I'm so excited to get to talk to you again. You have a book called Unstoppable Brain, and you talk about biological reasons that people are running on empty. And you talk about a structure in the brain called the habenula. And you talk about how it is the brain's failure detector. Talk to us about what this is, why it is important, and how does it cause us to get stuck?
Yeah. So this is the brake pedal for all behavior in the brain. This determines whether you do something or you don't do something. And so it is the definition of stuckness, meant to keep us from taking life-threatening risks and bad decisions. And so what happens is that when we try to do something different with our lives, like let's say we're trying to improve our lives and be more rested or be more well in general, this is the part of the brain that if we judge ourselves secretly, silently, or we feel like we're not doing it perfectly or the right way, then this area of the brain will become activated. And that's just like in the brakes in your car. You pump the brakes, you're going to come to a screeching halt. And so we don't know that we're doing this to ourselves, but by thinking in terms of all or nothing, black and white, comparison thinking, I call these failure diseases, these kind of repeated patterns of how we quote unquote fail, how we just get disappointed, how we get frustrated, those kinds of things. If we don't tend to those thoughts, then they activate this area and we lose all of our motivation to keep trying good things.
So when you say failure, you mentioned frustration. I'm assuming this is where you actually set out, you have a goal, you don't achieve it. But what are some of the more subtle ways that we, quote, fail throughout the day?
Yeah, failure is something that we've been so avoidant of it as a society that we haven't embraced all the different forms that it can take in our brain, all the different signals that we can perceive of as a failure. You could fail at doom scrolling. Something as, silly as that can turn on this part of the brain and kill your motivation. So we just didn't know that this existed. And so therefore we're not taking it seriously yet. So disappointment center is another nickname for this in the science world. And, the main thing is that anything that makes you feel bad, helpless, powerless, like you're not doing it right, like it didn't go exactly as planned, anything like that, any thoughts like that can turn this part on. And this part of your brain is also responsible for, negative self-talk. So anytime you're being hard on yourself, anytime you're judging yourself or criticizing yourself inside your own head, this is going to be the area that you're activating, and then you're killing your motivation to do something good for yourself.
It sounds like this is not a good structure. Like, why do we need this in our brains?
Yeah. Well, it keeps us alive. It keeps us from touching the hot stove more than once. It keeps us from making stupid decisions. It keeps us from making, risky decisions with our money or our relationships or even our health. And so it is a good thing to have this kind of more conservative area of the brain that's like, no, like think about it, don't do that. Don't just throw caution to the wind. But again, when it comes to good stuff, it's also stopping us. It's also the brake pedal. And so I think that's just something that we just didn't know until now.
Mm-hmm. Where is this located in our brain?
Yeah, I recently talked to a habenula researcher, and it's a very small community of habenula researchers in the world, right? But this is like one of the only women, I think. And she said, our joke in our circles, it's a nerdy joke, is, the whole cortex, all the other brain matter is just there as padding for the habenula, meaning that it is at the center, the very center of the brain, in the midbrain. And so their joke is like everything else is just kind of like a pillow around this area to keep it safe.
Okay. Okay. So it's not like in the limbic system, the cortex, the here, the there. It's kind of, is it diffuse or is it like
It's a
like
hub.
it's
Yeah,
a
so
hub.
all of those come into this hub. And so therefore it has control over those functions. It controls your mood. You know, it is responsible for depression, anxiety. It's responsible for addiction and withdrawal symptoms from addiction. It's responsible for your motivation, your dopamine system, your serotonin system, your melatonin system. All of these things are all centralizing to this little tiny half centimeter double, like little peas in the middle of your brain.
Okay. So how do we care for this area of our brain if it's so important in protecting us and preventing us from making irrational and stupid decisions? How do we care for this area of our brain?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that we're dealing with now in our society is that there's so much information flooding our brain. Like no other generation before us has had to deal with the amount of information and the amount of decision making and discernment that our brains have to these days. And it's exhausting. I mean, people are tired, they're burned out because we didn't know about this area of the brain. And now the modern skill is to notice when it's on. So things like procrastination, things like feeling badly, things like feeling unmotivated. Those are all signs and symptoms that this area of the brain is on, because it turns on without us knowing it, right? Because we kind of just have our thoughts and we don't realize that our thoughts triggered it. And then we're like, oops, I'm procrastinating. Why am I procrastinating? So the modern skill is, number one, noticing those symptoms. Number two, then secondarily, doing everything you can to hunt where you might have failed or felt disappointed or frustrated or disempowered, and then turning it off deliberately, meaning that you either get support, you know, through peers or friends or things like that, or you go to therapy, or you do something good for your body, you know, anything that can shut it off, because you are basically saying, what matters is that I didn't fail. Tell a different story. Have a different way of thinking about it. It's called reframing in psychology, where, you know, I thought about it this way and now I'm thinking about it this way. And the more you can think that you cannot fail at something and you haven't failed at something, the more protected you are from this mechanism.
Is it dangerous for us to turn off this function of the habenula?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in addiction medicine is that, and also in depression, is that once you overstimulate it, like you trigger it, it starts to shrink, they think. And that's just like the brakes in your car. If it starts, your brake pads wear out, then you don't got brakes, and your brakes go out, and then you do reckless things unopposed. So when you shrink, you know, people with shrunken habenula are usually depressed, they are impulsive, they are addicted to things, and they feel out of control.
Ah. And if somebody has a shrunken habenula, are there things that we can do to expand it again?
Yeah, and what's so interesting is that there was this study on bariatric surgery patients, and they weren't looking for this, but they found in their brain scans after about 6 months post-surgery that their habenula had returned to a normal size, but that because they were probably addicted to food and maybe other things in the beginning, they had shrunken habenula, probably depressed, all those things that they were experiencing. Depression is a symptom, in my opinion. It's not a disease.
Right.
It's something that is a symptom of, hey, my habenula's on, I need to do something about it. And now that we know, we can put these pieces together.
What do you think depression is a symptom of?
Failure.
Of failure.
I think I failed at something. I fail at being like the other kids. I fail at, you know, being the perfect mom. I fail at, you know, I have some expectation of where I should be in my career, or my relationship should be a certain way, or I should be a certain way, or gosh, I shouldn't, watch so much TV shows and things like that. Like just those little life failures, and then they turn on. And because you are depressed, meaning that the more depressed you are, the more depressive symptoms you're going to experience, because you can't find your way out of the failure free fall.
If we're in this failure free fall, is it only leading to depression, or can it also lead to emotional outbursts or anxiety or anhedonia? I
Yeah,
mean, what are the ways that
it's a
failure
long
can
list.
manifest? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long list. Sleep disorders. So, the habenula is also in charge of your circadian rhythm, particularly the sort of non-REM sleep where you're recovering. And it also drives emotional eating and stress eating, and also stress itself, chronic stress.
Okay.
And so all of the things that we in our society think are problematic around our mental health and our lack of well-being seem to pivot or center around the habenula's actions. And so that's why I say that the modern skill is learning how to figure out where you thought you failed, and then to find a way to believe otherwise, and to talk yourself out of it or get yourself out of it. Let it go, even. Some people can do that.
I think a lot of people are afraid of failure and afraid to talk about failure. How do you encourage, parents to talk to children about failures, spouses to talk about failures, and how do we talk about failure more effectively in the workplace?
Yeah, I feel like what's working for people that I talk to is failure is an illusion. It's a concept, not a reality. Because, you cannot fail at living your life. You cannot fail at being you. This is what I tell children. This is what I tell teenagers and young people, especially because they are, facing a world where they put so much pressure on themselves. We have these kids performing at like 9, 10. This very, very successful executive and I had a conversation the other day, and her son threw up at summer camp because it was soccer, and he had so much performance anxiety that he had to go home for the day because he was just so high strung and nauseous, right?
Yeah.
And so, we have to protect our children and kind of pad them with, hey, you cannot fail at this. Even if you don't do well at soccer camp or whatever, maybe soccer is not your thing. Life will guide you to your thing. You are an athlete, regardless of soccer or no soccer. So those kinds of things, I think, if parents know about this mechanism in their child's brain, let alone what they should do for themselves, they can help protect their children as they're going into these performative environments like school, like sports, like, and any skill that your child is endeavoring.
I mean, I think a lot of children and a lot of adults are going into either a literal game, a sports game, or kind of the game of life, where they're in some sort of working environment, a parenting environment that's challenging, caring for an elderly parent. And a lot of people feel like they're doing all the right things, and yet they're living on the edge of burnout all the time, sometimes for years. Where does this emotional exhaustion arise from, and how can people overcome it?
Yeah, two things: expectations and comparisons.
Okay.
We get this idea with media, social media, that kind of thing, of how perfect we need to be. And we even take that into our home communities and schools and religious organizations, and feel like we're not measuring up. And, I love the phrase giving yourself grace. Like, that should be endless grace. That shouldn't just be in that moment. It should just say, like, hey, nobody's perfect. Literally, no matter what they look like, there's nobody who's perfect. I've met them all, supermodels and famous people and all these people that people look up to, and everybody suffers. And so realizing that you're doing the best you can, and loving your effort, as a caregiver. My mom took care of my grandmother for 10 years in her home, and she was burned out and she was exhausted because she was also raising my little sister. And I just said to her one day, I was like, Mom, you're doing everything right. And I could just feel the exhale. because she had put pressure on herself. Now remember, the habenula is the source of negative self-talk. So her habenula was going, I'm failing at caregiving, I'm failing at parenting, I'm failing, I'm failing, I'm failing. And, again, burnout is basically, you know what you should do, you're just not doing it. And that's because your habenula is on.
Right.
So
Right.
the ease comes from turning it off, like getting good at turning it off. And in my family, we're in active conversation around this. Okay, track it. Where's your habenula on? Oh, how do you turn it off? Well, I think I could do this, or I think I could believe this, or I could let go of the idea that the perfection, or my expectation, like that kind of mental flexibility, which recently was shown to be the definition of intelligence, is cognitive flexibility, the mental flexibility, the adaptation, that I call it iterative mindset, the ability to iterate your way through life so that you are protected from failure.
So if someone is living in a mindset where they just think that they're failing at everything, it's great to be like, just turn it off. But what are some what are some ways that you encourage people with some like really down to earth, meaningful lifestyle interventions that can take them from this mindset of, I'm not going to try because I'm going to fail, to, even if it doesn't turn out the way that I want it to, it doesn't mean that it's a failure?
Yeah, and I found in my research that people who, are good at this are always iterating, meaning that, they are tweaking what they're doing, they're investigating what else to do, they're experimenting, they're trying on something different, or they're tinkering with it like you would tinker with an old car, like those kinds of people. And I'm trying to get the message out that like everybody can do that, that's
Right.
available to everybody. We just didn't know because we were so stuck in rigid, linear, performative, methodologies, that we forgot how to be humans. You look at AI was born from iteration, cycles and cycles and cycles of iteration, selected for, the chatbots we see today were selected out of chatbots that didn't iterate, because those died and these lived. And so we're no different, as living, breathing, learning beings here to learn. It is our birthright to iterate our way through problems and to figure it out.
So if we are in a work environment where it is achieve it, make it happen, or else, that it seems like could trigger this failure center, but also trigger our fear centers, our cortisol, making us less likely to be able to do the tasks. What would you say to a boss who, gets frustrated that employees, you give them a task and a week goes by and it's like, have you done anything on that? And it's like, depending on the type of person that you're working with, either you have expectations of them that are not being met, which causes problems, or they don't have the drive or the skill set or the ability to ask questions. They've got that fear coming in. How do we craft a work environment that turns failure into an iteration?
Exactly. I think like two things. One is anybody that you see has risen in their lives to a level of high success, with effort, with merit, does it with iteration. So that's the blueprint. And you can reverse engineer that. If you are early in your career and you're just getting started, you can think, okay, how can I iterate on this? How can I iterate on that? Those kinds of things. And even iterating on your workplace, because if your workplace is truly, truly toxic, then an iteration could be getting a different workplace, And then the other thing I would say is, if you're the manager, and this is something we're actively practicing at my company, Fresh Try, is asking your people to iterate instead of fail. Okay, so I want this next iteration. That doesn't say that you failed at this. It just means like, here's how I want you to improve it. Here's how I want you to learn. Here's how I want you to tweak it. I just had a conversation this morning with somebody who is very intelligent and very scientific and very perfectionistic about her work. And, just saying, hey, this is what I need for this iteration, that iteration. It's safe language that way. And it doesn't mean that at the end of the year, we don't look at what are your accomplishments? What are the things? Because we are professionals and we can perform in our roles. It's just that right now we're overperforming. We're over relying on performance and we're under relying on iteration and acknowledging that that's the way to real engagement, to real, accomplishment and maximum productivity comes through that iteration layer, not through continually beating somebody over the head with performance measures.
Well, that's kind of what I was about to get at is if you've got a culture where you've got metrics that have to be met, or either the system is going to be penalized or the individual is going to be penalized, it doesn't give a lot of flexibility for error and for saying like, I tried it, it didn't work, so I'm going to try X, Y, and Z next because of what I learned in the first experiment or the first engagement with a new employee or whatever it may be. We all have opportunities to fail all day long. I mean, do you think that humans throughout the day fail more or succeed more?
I think two things happen. There's two batches of people. There's people who have a performance mindset, which in the science shows that they will be demotivated, because of the habenula. That's my assumption there, and that they can be prone to lying, cheating, and also working less. So if you want somebody to work less and to succeed less, then you have rigid goals and you have performance measures that don't move, and you force them to do it this one way, and you give them no flexibility or ability to adapt. Then there is the iterative mindset, people who iterate their way through, because in every part of business, I don't know about you, but like I have to iterate multiple times a day on what I think, how I'm approaching something, what I'm creating in response to this, and including researching more and things like that. So those people, again, rise to the top, and the more that they can get people under them and on their teams to also think that way and also iterate, the more productive they're going to be, the more responsive they're going to be, the faster they will recover from challenge, and the more creative they're going to, solve their problems. So it's very serious business. And to me, looking at it over and over again, the same pattern. I was in a big company once, and I saw how, the performance measures alone, without iteration, without the ability to adapt, created a lot of hostility, a lot of burnout, a lot of gossip, a lot of throwing people under the bus, that, really bad behaviors from individuals. And then we still had a 20% layoff every fall, to make numbers. And so this is the roughness of the game that we're playing. But again, those that could adapt and iterate their way through the year, like myself, rose to the top and got promoted and did well. And I didn't know what was going on then. Otherwise, I would have shared, this knowledge then as well.
Looking at the people that get, kind of systematically laid off in November, or the person that gets a promotion, what are some fundamental things that these people do not have in common?
One of them is able to manage their habenula and the other one is not. So the ones that succeed are the ones that, and I'm not saying everybody who gets laid off has not managed their habenula well. Maybe they did, and they're just supposed to be somewhere else, like they're not in the right place, from like a God view, if you will. But let's say that they were otherwise supposed to be there or could be there, right? those that stay there in their right place are the ones who are able to turn off and manage their habenula, keep going, keep iterating when other people fail to do so, and lose their motivation and get stuck and get lost and lose time wallowing in depression and feel disempowered and feel shy and feel like they're the victim, So all of those things, it just splits the population in two in my experience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is one of those things. We're all failing. It's just how much you're learning from it. And if you're failing and other people are working on projects with you, chances are they're making the same mistakes that you are. It's just everybody is afraid to talk about it. How did failure become such a taboo?
I don't know. I think that it's human nature to want to succeed and be seen as a success, And so, one thing I found interesting is that the son of Freud was the one who, in the 1950s, created the sort of modern marketing of, not feeling good enough. And so all of the ads telling you you're not pretty enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not rich enough, you're not, smart enough, all that stuff, I think, set the stage for this fear, this terror around failing, especially in front of others.
Yeah, I think about these strategies that can help people to get into those motivational systems in a way that is sustainable. I think so often we're trying to feel better when really, if we're just able to feel better, whether those feelings are fear or sadness or anger or frustration or love or happiness, if we're able to feel it and name it, I think that we're better able to then think our way through it. Because if you know that you're frustrated and you're trying to do a task, chances are maybe you could pick a different time to do it, or you go, okay, I am feeling frustrated, and you use that frustration to propel you, to propel you forward so that you can do things a little bit better. Kyra, tell us about your book, Unstoppable Brain.
Yeah, so Unstoppable Brain is the first book to cover the science of the habenula. We're lucky to live in a time when this is coming out. And I knew that normally science takes about 17 years to work its way through the system. And I was like, I think we need it now, So I really wanted to do a good job covering like how important, how significant this is, because give it a few years, Lindsey, and all of mental health will turn on this fact. All of performance will turn on this fact. All motivation stuff will turn on this fact. Like people will be talking about this right and left because it's more significant than any other area of the brain that we have, so far focused on as a culture, and we as a culture have, motivation was first used in the 1950s. Goals was first used in the 1940s, after World War II. So there's ways in which, the kind of collective psychology adopts certain truths and then makes them their own and applies them. So that was the whole book. That was the whole reason for writing the book, was to help people to A, know they had a habenula, B, know how serious to take failure, C, know how to turn failure off with iteration, and really just free themselves up so that they could do what they wanted to do and get out of, the no-do gap. I know what to do, I just don't do it.
Why do you think this works so much better than kind of traditional things like counting calories and, living on social media and going after the likes and the followers? And even, we haven't talked a lot about the SMART program. I love the SMART program. Why do they not work?
SMART goals?
Yeah.
I think they work sometimes.
Yeah.
In my research, they work 5% of the time for 5% of the people. But for 95% of the people, eventually what happens is that some imperfect, unexpected thing happens, and then a failure occurs in the brain. I think my theory, Lindsey, is that if maybe we said, okay, use a SMART goal, but realize that it's very unlikely to work exactly as you're planning.
Right.
Even though you created this perfect plan, right? Your perfect SMART, it's all checked off and everything. And then you go live it and it doesn't look at all like that.
Right.
And so if we tell people this is going to happen, it's most likely going to go sideways. Don't freak out. You didn't fail. Just iterate. Then it could be safe. But right now, the way it's practiced, it's a sharp, pointy knife that cuts people eventually, because at some point it goes sideways and then they don't know what to do. Then they blame themselves. Then they trigger demotivation. They trigger depression, and the whole thing kind of cycles out. And then next thing you know, they're just eating chips in front of a laptop or whatever, or in front of a phone.
Sounds like my kind of Thursday right there. You know what I mean? I'm sitting
in small measure. Yeah,
I know. I'm sitting here right now going like, you can go to the gym within the next hour, or you can sit here and eat chips in front of a computer and watch Netflix. And it's, my therapist always says, depending on the decisions that you make, you're either going to feel one way when you walk in here tomorrow, or you're going to feel a different way. Which way do you want to feel? Do you want to walk in here going like, and it may be one of those days where true self-care is, I'm going to take a bath at 4:00 in the afternoon and eat some cake and go to bed at 7:30. That may be true self-care one day, but there is something to turning off this part of your brain and being like, it's not a huge deal, but I went outside this morning and that was an accomplishment. Or I went to the gym even though it was 30 minutes and that's still an accomplishment. I kept my mouth closed when I was angry. That's an accomplishment.
Or I ate the cake and I learned something. I learned that I don't want to do that every night.
Right.
Or I learned that I could eat less of it because I threw away the rest of it. Or, there's just any little bit of harm reduction is what it's called. Just getting in your way, stopping the descent as soon as you possibly can, so that you can have some modicum of, okay, I've got a grip on myself. And the more you fail, the more you fail. And so again, talking yourself out of that failure, or having somebody who's really good at talking you out of your failure, is the way out, and iterating out of that really dark, deep place where you think all is lost. And the more you recover, I find, the more people recover, the more they stand up, the stronger their legs get. And they can stand up faster, and they recognize when to stand up, and their confidence comes in. And that's how they get empowered.
I love it. Listeners, go and check out drkyrabobinet.com. If you are someone who wants the autonomy and power to change your life for the better and yet feel stuck in the same old bad habits, patterns, and short-term fixes. And if you think you sit back and go, I know what I should do, but I can't get myself to actually do it, Unstoppable Brain is for you, where Dr. Kyra, she's going to teach you more about the habenula, possibly the most powerful controller of behavior that we have ever found. So go pick up a copy of Unstoppable Brains and check out drkyrabobinet.com. Dr. Kyra, thank you so much for coming in and being a guest today on the Lindsey Elmore Show.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lindsey.